So we're very close to being on Ravnica. Ravnica Remastered is coming out, and then we have Murders at Karlov Manor coming out immediately after that. And a lot of the story that was just featured was featuring actually on like the relationship between Planeswalkers and the non-Planeswalkers of the world post-Aftermath. I think one interesting feature of that is that Planeswalkers are a very public feature of Ravnica due to the events of War of the Spark. The fact that 5 Planeswalkers took over 5 of the guilds leading up to War of the Spark. A Planeswalker in the form of Jace was the guild pact for years before that. And post-fact, Ral apparently still has a spark, but is missing. And I wanted to talk about where the remaining of the 5 leaders and Jace are at right now as we go into that set. So here are all of them. So the 5 leaders were Dovin Bond, who was in charge of the Azorius, Kaya, who was in charge of the Orzhov, Domri Raid, who was in charge of the Gruul clans, Vraska, who was in charge of the Golgari, and Ral, who took charge of the Izzet. 2 of those characters were killed during the events of War of the Spark. Domri Raid was betrayed by Bolas, and his spark was taken by one of the Eternals. It's relatively sad because Domri Raid was like a teenager, so like he did not know what he got himself into. And he's an underrated character that has a Justice for Domri campaign behind him. Dovin Ban, also dead, killed by Chandra post War of the Spark, but after War of the Spark. So he has a big fight with War of the Spark, and then he dies post fact. I believe pretty brutally, like his eyes are melted out of his face. The next 2, which I'm going to call Jace and Vraska, who are in love with each other, were both completed during the Phyrexian invasion. Vraska was then punched with a Falcon Punch by Ral, and by Falcon Punch I mean, just took a big Izzet gauntlet, charged it with so much electricity that he punched Vraska to the point where she was described as almost evaporating. It is thought by the world that she was killed by it, but they did the whole like body wasn't there once they figured out and checked the look. So chances are Vraska is still around. We just don't know. We have no idea. By the way, if you haven't read that story specifically, any of the stories involving Jason Vraska during All Will Be One or March of the Machines, highly recommend them. I recommend having a tissue box nearby. They're the best story content right in all year. Jace, we don't know what happened to Jace at all. In the story, Jace read Elesh Norn's mind on knowing where he needs to go, and he just blooped off, and then we haven't seen him since. My assumption is he's who saved Vraska personally. My head canon at the moment is that he was supposed to go after Tezzeret because he would know where Tezzeret would go hide, because he also was a member of the the secret organization that Tezzeret runs, the consortium, and that he's now in charge of it. And Tezzeret is once again a minion of someone against his will, because he is always a bridesmaid and never a bride. But without any information, we don't know where Jace is. We don't know where Vraska is. They're both off doing things. We don't know. So that's the next 2. So Dovin Bond, Domri, War of the Spark dead. Vraska, Jace, completed during March of Machines, and and unknown locations, obviously no longer in charge of their 2 guilds. It is pretty insinuated that Vraska decimated the Golgari from a completion perspective as well. So the Golgari is pretty, they mentioned that 2 guilds were specifically very hurt by the invasion. And I believe from what we know from when it happened and what we're seeing, Golgari and Simic were those 2. Which makes sense. Those were the 3 main colors. Both of the main leadership that was on board with things before Elesh Norn took over, and then also of the original invasion before Elesh Norn took over of Mirrodin. So then we get the last 2, and that is Kaya and Ral. Ral is easy. Ral is still in charge. He married Tomek. He's missing in the most recent story specifically, but as far as we know, living his best life. Happy for him. Possibly annoyed that Niv Mizzet is the guild pack, just because they have a fun relationship. And the other one is Kaya, who was in charge of the Orzhov, then went on this mission during the invasion, and during that moment where she was gone, trying to infiltrate Phyrexia, and then was fighting the Phyrexians off at different planes during the war, she was usurped. She was the usurper, and now she has been usurped. And Teyza has taken over, finally. I mean, it's been a long time coming, and this most recent story was basically Teyza dragging Kaya around as like, haha, see, I'm the one in charge. Look at my trophy of this previous leader who's no longer in charge, because she's a Planeswalker. We don't like those anymore. But it is an interesting feature that they are collectively disliked. Planeswalkers on Ravnica, pretty publicly anti-sentiment against them due to the fact that they're being blamed both for the Phyrexian War and War of the Spark.